Yume Nikki is a very unique game. It was originally released on a Japanese forum by a solo developer under the pseudonym Yume, and the game would go on to become a cult hit in the following years. In fact, the game garnered enough attention to be picked up by the studio Playism, leading to the reboot under the name of Yume Nikki Dream Diary to be made in 2018. But for the purposes of this review, I'll only be taking a look at the original RPG Maker freeware version of Yume Nikki from 2004. Of course, it was this original version of the game that actually went on to influence Toby Fox's hit RPG Undertale and Dan Silvato's infamous horror visual novel Doki Doki Literature Club. In fact, this game actually spawned a number of fan games based directly on it, such as Yume Tuki and Dot Flow, and created something of a small subgenre of games that involve strange or surreal exploration, ordinarily by a young female protagonist. Yet, despite this, the game's always been surrounded by mystery, as no one knows anything about the game's creator, Yume. After releasing the game and a few updates leading all the way into 2007, Yume went completely silent. In fact, it was only in 2018 that fans of Yume Nikki got any sort of confirmation that Yume was still alive, as Playism, the creators of the reboot, claimed to have permission from Yume themselves. And for me personally, this was about all I knew about the game going into it. I'd always heard about the game and heard that it was somewhat mysterious. I knew that it influenced some of the games that I enjoy, but I really didn't know what kind of game it was. Upon entering the game for the first time, you'll get some very brief screens showing roughly what you're supposed to do in the game, and then you'll take control of a young shut-in by the name of Matsuki, who seems to have no interest in leaving her room. This leaves the player with only a few options. There's a small video game console in Matsuki's room, which the player can play a small minigame on, as well as going out on the balcony, but neither of those activities really get you anywhere. The real main attraction within Matsuki's room is her bed, as you'll spend most of the game exploring Matsuki's dreams. It's within Matsuki's dreams that the player is tasked with finding a number of what the game calls effects, and it's these effects that can be sometimes used like power-ups, but at other times are really just cosmetic changes. See, when I first started out this game, the first effect that I found was called Lamp, and it turned the main character's head into a lamp. Now, at that point in the game, I had noticed that there is a very dark area. Of course, the first thing I thought to do was go over there, use that ability, and voila, the area lit up. But this moment was a little bit misleading for me. This actually led me to believe for a moment that this game might actually play out like a Metroidvania game. I started to take note of things that maybe in the future I would be able to overcome in some way if I gained the proper ability. For example, this can lead to interesting gameplay moments in a game like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where the player might find a ledge that's a little bit too high for them to jump to, only to find double jump later on, allowing them to get up there, only to find a grate that they can't get past until they learn Mist. However, I slowly started to realize that this game isn't like that at all. Most of the effects that you can find within this game are purely cosmetic, and only about 5 of them are ever used in order to complete the game. And maybe I personally would have enjoyed the game a little bit more if it did pull some of those elements from Metroidvania games. But then I think at that point it wouldn't have been the kind of game it is. I think if the game had focused a little bit more on Metroidvania elements, then it would have lost something in its very open exploration of Matsuki's dream world. This is why I think that it was actually a very beneficial and deliberate choice to make most of the effects gatherable in any order, and have most of them have no meaningful effect on gameplay. Although, I think it is still fair to criticize the game for the fact that certain items such as the bicycle and the knife that could be either useful at all times for increasing the slow walk speed or being critical for finding other items can be easily missed. But for the most part, this is a small criticism, as both of these items are relatively easy to find, with the bike actually being the second item that I ever found. Now, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the world that the player is exploring. The world can be extremely confusing, and while it's clear that this is an intentional move to induce the sort of bizarre feeling that person can get from dreaming, it can make it very difficult to find things. Many of the maps loop, which means that if you walk north far enough, you'll end up finding yourself back exactly where you started, and if you walk diagonally, you can pretty much be lost forever. Of course, at any time, the player can press 9 to wake themselves up, and if they do so, they can get back into bed and start back in the main world with 12 doors to the 12 separate sub-worlds. And it's inside of these sub-worlds that the player can actually find even deeper sub-worlds of sorts, including a very confusing red maze area, which is necessary to traverse in order to complete the game, but is almost impossible to find your way around in. While this was clearly a very intentional design choice by Kikiyama, it still did detract from the game for me. It was the confusion in a number of these worlds that made me start to wonder how this game ever picked up so much popularity. It was getting to the point where, after finding a number of the effects, I was starting to become frustrated. I couldn't find anything new. But that was until one event in the game changed my mind completely. After walking past a manhole cover in order to get to a certain effect, walking back past it as I was leaving, there was a red tentacle sticking out of it. Of course, my first assumption was that collecting that effect was what triggered the red tentacle to stick out of the manhole. And so I interacted with the manhole. I entered, and what I saw inside is what I could only describe as some sort of large white dog chattering its jaw. It was very surreal to see and unexpected based on what I had seen up to that point in the game, even though most of the imagery in the game was very surreal and creepy. And while this event caught me off guard, I was still looking in there for some way to move forward, but I couldn't find any. So I turned to Google, and it was there that I found that this event actually didn't have anything to do with progressing through the game. In fact, even though this game came out in 2004, the only thing that I found that related to what I saw was a YouTube video posted years ago with fewer than 100 views. It was through this that I found out that this was a random event that no one knows how to trigger. In fact, the game is full of these random events, and it was one of these random events in particular that actually caused the game to gain the traction that it did. See, back when the game was originally released on a Japanese forum, only a few people actually gave it a shot, and it wasn't particularly noteworthy at first, until there was a certain forum user that had reported seeing a very startling event in the game, and when they described how they actually activated it, other forum members didn't have the same results. This event involves going into a specific room in the game. Inside, there will be a similar young girl to the main character. Most of the room can't actually be interacted with in any way, not even the other young girl. But one thing in the room can be interacted with, the light switch. Here's what happens normally when you flip the light switch. Really, not all that noteworthy. It's an interesting event, but nothing to freak out about on a forum. That is, unless you're particularly unlucky, as there's a 1 in 64 chance that when you flip that light switch, the girl in the center of the room will change to a character called Uboa, who appears to be a strange white stretched out face. The room will shake and the music will get very dramatic. You'll no longer be able to exit, and your only option is to either interact with Uboa, who will take you to a world that you also can't exit, or press 9 to wake yourself up. When I read that, I really started to realize that this game isn't about just collecting the effects. It's about seeing all the sights in Madsuki's dream. You see, this game is really one of the earliest walking simulators. It's all you really do in the game. It's all about exploration, and there is so much to see. Even after multiple playthroughs in order to get footage of the game, I noticed that I was seeing things that I hadn't seen the first time, even in areas that I had been to in my first playthrough of the game. But this is what starts to beg the question. If this is a game all about exploring this girl's dreams, and they're so bizarre and sometimes horrific, what could have happened to Madsuki that inspired these dreams? You'll start to notice certain symbolism or possible symbolism as you walk through the game. There's an entire world full of just hands and eyes. In another area of the game, the player walks through a dark forest with eyes constantly watching them, and going to bed inside of the dream can sometimes trigger an event in which the player's transported to a staircase completely surrounded by hands. There's also the fact that no one in the game can communicate with the player. There's no dialogue in the entire game other than in the menus. And then there's the fact that this entire dream world takes place right outside of the door of the dream version of Madsuki's room. The same one that she would nod her head no if you even attempted to leave when she's awake. And this is really what gets the player thinking. Are these dreams representations of how Madsuki sees the world, or are some of the strange things that Madsuki's seeing in her dream worlds just the random firing of synapses, like real dreams? And because there's really no explanation in this game, the player is left to figure out which events are meaningful and which ones aren't on their own. I think this is the reason why, even though the game was relatively short, and I really didn't know much going into it, ever since playing it, I'll randomly have some image or event from the game pop into my mind and start to think about the game again. I'll start to wonder if it could mean something, or if it is another one of those random events. Of course, just because a game is memorable doesn't always mean it's good, and this is certainly the type of game that I could say isn't a game for everyone. The same kind of audience that may have been excited for a game like Doom Eternal to come out may not have a lot of overlap with the people who would find this game really interesting. And on top of that, I personally find it very hard to call this game fun. But I don't think this is the kind of game that needs to be fun to be good. Of course, after playing it, even though it's really not the kind of thing that I would usually go out of my way to play, in fact, I ignored this game for years of knowing it, I think this game was certainly worthwhile, and I would almost say that it's a must-play for someone who's really into surreal horror or walking simulators with a focus on exploration. So, considering all of this, if I had to assign a number label to the game, I think that I would have to give it a 3 out of 5, just because of how niche it is. Even though I think that for some people this is gonna be a 5 out of 5. In fact, I've heard people say that this is their favorite game of all time. That group just isn't that big. So for most people, that might not be that interested by this description, or don't want to go back and play a 2004 RPG Maker game. I think that it's fine to miss it. But for me, I don't think I'm going to be forgetting this game anytime soon.